Welcome to Journey Back. This is Joshua, and today we're going to be talking about a story. This story has to deal with suicide, and specifically suicide prevention. This talk of mine does include references to suicide and self-harm, so please take care of yourself, and if anything becomes too unsettling, feel free to pause or move off this video. I was 14 the first time I tried to take my own life. Not because I wanted to die, but because I didn't know how to live a life where I had to become somebody else just to be accepted. Growing up in an immigrant diasporic household meant that I had to code switch frequently in order to survive. Going to school, I was constantly managing how I came across. Would people make fun of my food, my hair, or my skin color? So I just decided to keep my head down. And at home, well, it was quite the opposite. I kept everything in. Because in our culture, expressing emotions feels like betrayal. You don't cry because what are you crying about? You don't ask questions because that's disrespect. And you don't express sadness because you are lucky to be here. And then at school, they'd hand you out a worksheet that says, how are you feeling today? And they just kind of mess with your head. So at school, they encouraged emotions. At home, they discouraged emotions. My entire upbringing felt like a contradiction, where neither side made space for how I actually felt. So, I made a decision to disappear. I learned how to shrink, and I learned how to silence my questions. But I could never silence the thoughts. That night, I sat in my bedroom door with a knife in my hand. And I didn't leave a note. I didn't cry. I just wondered, what would life be like if I could finally be seen for who I am? But no one noticed. 2 years went by. And by the time I was 16, my body was breaking down. Sleepless nights, chronic stomach pains, mood swings, disassociation, and nobody connected the dots. I reached my limit again. Another suicide attempt, because nothing changed. I wasn't a broken kid. I was a kid in a broken system. And even throughout my tumultuous adolescence, having come close to death twice, the data would have said I was fine. You see, this system mistakes silence for success. We live in a world where schools are trained to recognize disruption, but not disappearance. We live in a world where our families are trained to recognize dishonor, but not depression. And we live in a world where institutions are trained to collect numbers, but not nuance. I was never acting out. I was always acting inward. I was internalizing every single thing that I had endured. And I was not a threat to others, just a threat to myself. And the truth? The system wasn't built to catch kids that look like me. So what saved me was not a therapist. It wasn't a hotline, and it wasn't a program. It was my sister. After my second suicide attempt, my parents had finally let go of their idea of success, and they stopped pushing it onto me. And they didn't let go completely. Not perfectly, but enough. enough for a new story to begin. And it was my sister that opened the door. They gave me permission to step outside of the version of myself that I was dying to escape. They didn't offer me advice. They offered me presence, a space to cry, a reason to stay. And it was around that time that I discovered my passion, acting. It was the first place where I was allowed to cry without consequences. The first place where I was allowed to speak without having to translate my soul. In the first place where I was allowed to rage without being told I was too much. Through scenes and monologues, I began to unearth my own truth. And it was there that I learned I wasn't broken, just unspoken. Art didn't solve my pain, but it gave me access to it. It gave me something to hold. It gave me a mirror. And what I learned throughout my journey, my 10-year journey as an artist, is that vulnerability is the single most important component to human change. When we think about the word vulnerability, what comes up for you? Weakness? Fear? Exposure? That's what came up for me as well when I first was entered into the creative realm in the performing arts. But vulnerability is not about a confession. It's not about exposure. And it's not about you just dumping your feelings onto another. Vulnerability is having the capacity to accept all parts of yourself unconditionally and say, it's okay. You're enough. Real vulnerability is the ability to be emotionally intelligent. And it's the skill of being able to state what is true, even when there's no guarantee that it will be understood. So vulnerability is not a weakness. It is the architecture of connection. It's where safety is born. And when vulnerability is not built into our systems, the systems will rely on metrics, attendance, grades, compliance. They will reward silence and completely miss the signals. And so if we want to prevent suicide, what we're going to need is a world of culturally fluent systems, a world of trauma-informed infrastructures, and a world of youth-led interventions that do not distort who we truly are. And, vulnerability is not a personality trait either. It's a skill. And vulnerability is a skill that is required for relational development. It is a skill required for human trust. And so if we do not build vulnerability into the foundation of our world, we will continue to misread the data. So that's what Journey Back, the company that I founded, is here to do. The mission of Journey Back is to bring vulnerability to the limelight and make it a cultural touchstone of value, where we design spaces, stories, and systems that teach people how to feel again. I firmly believe that vulnerability is the most important catalyst for human change. That when we bear our hearts open to each other and we have the courage to hold space for others to do the same, that the unseen becomes visible. And that is where real transformation begins. And so, I'm not saying I figured it all out, but I am saying that I'm here, standing here today, because I survived a system, an education system, that was not built for kids that look like me. And so, I wasn't saved. I escaped. And so if we want to prevent suicide, we need to not wait for the next data set and begin listening to the people who have already crossed the fire. Thank you.